The Denver Broncos were once at the top of the NFL world back in 2016 when they won Super Bowl 50, sending off the Sheriff with a Super Bowl victory to end his career. In the 4 years with Payton Manning, the Denver Broncos were 50-14 and made the playoffs every single season. And in the final season in 2015, Denver had one of the best defenses that the NFL has ever seen, which gave Broncos fans a lot of hope for the years following Payton Manning. Little did we know it would all go downhill from there. In the 8 seasons following Payton Manning, Denver went 52-79 with only one winning season, which came in the season following the Super Bowl, where they went 9-7 and missed the playoffs. In those 8 seasons, they also had 12 different starting quarterbacks: Trevor Siemian, Brock Osweiler, Paxton Lynch, Case Keenum, Joe Flacco, Drew Lock, Brandon Allen, Jeff Driscoll, Brett Rippon, Kendall Hinton, Teddy Bridgewater, Russell Wilson, and Jarrett Stidham. Now, the title of this video says something about this being one of the most excruciating playoff droughts that we've ever seen. Now, I understand there has been worse playoff droughts, like the Jets haven't been there in 15 years, or the Browns have had big playoff droughts. Teams have just been absolutely horrible. But what made the Broncos playoff drought so tough to watch was the fact that they were in a lot of close games, which made you feel that if a couple things went the Broncos' way, it would all look different. And the reason these games were so close most of the time is because of the fact that the Denver Broncos defense was solid throughout their drought. In those 8 years, the Broncos finished top 20 in offensive yards only 3 times. And the 3 times that they did, they finished 19th twice and they finished 17th once. The rest of them all above 20. Those best years being 2017, 2018, and 2021. But in terms of defensive yards, they were still pretty solid. They finished top 10 4 of those 8 years, and one of those years they finished 12th. So they finished top 15 5 of the 8 years, and one of those years they finished 29th, which was 2023, which was majorly buoyed by a 70-20 loss to the Dolphins. Without that 70-20 loss, they were also top 15 in defense, and they led the league in turnovers. So this defense kept them in the game time in and time out. 5 of those 8 seasons, Denver's average margin in a loss was 3 points or less. In 2 of those seasons, Denver had a positive point differential. In 2016, they had an average of a 2-point victory, and in 2021, they had an average of about a .76 victory. And in 2018, 19, and 23, they lost by an average of about a field goal per game. The years that were left out were 2017, 2020, and 2022, in which they lost by more points every single game. In those 8 seasons, Denver had 41 one-score losses, which means they averaged just over 5 one-score losses per game in that span, and they only averaged about 9.9 losses per game, which means they had more than half of their losses from that era being one-score losses. To put in perspective, let's go to the Jets over their last 8 seasons. They have about 4.6 one-score losses per season, but they also have 12 losses per season. And the Panthers' last 8 years, who did make the playoffs this year, but they also have been on a big drought before this year. They had the same amount of one-score losses. They had 5 one-score losses per game, but they also had a whole extra game in losses per season with 11. They had just over 11 losses per season. So with all these close games, the big culprit felt that we didn't have the offense to execute in clutch time. We had one of the better defenses that did sometimes fold in clutch time, I'm not even gonna lie. It was a rough clutch defense, but the problem was the entirety of these games, the offense wasn't really doing anything. So by the time the game was almost over, the defense is tired as hell because they've had to do all of the work and they aren't able to finish the job. Throughout these years, it just felt like Denver was a quarterback away from being at least a playoff team, and they kept trying different guys, and it seemed to always be some random white guy who felt like he could game manage enough so that we could go to the playoffs. And it wasn't like the offensive infrastructure was super bad. The O-line was not great, so it wasn't great for a quarterback coming into that system when the offensive line just wasn't that amazing. but you had good weapons. In the early part of this drought, you still had Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, who were said to be one of the best receiving cores in the league when they first started to be together. And then you moved on to Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant and all these other guys who had a lot of skill, but it didn't seem like we could get the most out of those players because we just didn't have the quarterback to get them the ball. And we also had a decent run game throughout this time. We had CJ Anderson for a few years, then Philip Lindsay came here and gave us a few 1,000-yard seasons and made a Pro Bowl in his rookie season. And like I said before, the defense was always a pretty solid unit, so it felt like all you needed was a little bit of push from the offense to just win some of these one-score games, because you kept losing just barely, and it felt like just a couple things go your way every single year, and now you've maybe won 10 or 11 games and now you're in the playoffs, but because just a few things didn't go your way in clutch time over the past 16 games, you're not playing in the postseason, and it was super frustrating. But the biggest problem with the Broncos in this huge playoff drought, which made it so excruciating to watch, is how much they gave you hope just to snatch it away. Every single season, there was hope at some point. Sometimes it was the beginning of the season. Sometimes you went into the season with not much hope, but by the end of the season, you had amazing hope for the next season. I'm going to go through every single season and tell you when and how the Broncos gave you hope, and when and how they absolutely shattered. In 2016, the year after the Super Bowl, you feel very confident. I mean, you just won a Super Bowl with one of the best defenses of all time. You may lose a few players in free agency, but at the end of the day, you still have Von Miller, you still have DeMarcus Ware, you still have Derek Wolfe, you still have Aqib Talib and Chris Harris and Darian Stewart, or not Darian Stewart, I think TJ Ward was there at the time, but you had good defensive infrastructure. You still had Brandon Marshall and Todd Davis, who were solid linebackers. You had all of these players that were super solid for this defense. And at the end of the day, in 2015, with Peyton Manning, Payton was one of the worst starters at quarterback in the NFL that season. When he played, he had, I think it was like 9 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. Brock Osweiler was able to come into that system and win 5 games out of the 7 that he played, which meant that you felt even if our quarterback play was subpar, we'd still be able to at least be in the playoffs because of how good this defense was. The Broncos defense in 2016 was still a top 5 unit, and Denver still had a winning record. They went 9-7. The Broncos defense just wasn't good enough to hold up this offense. Trevor Siemian was decent. He was probably one of the better quarterbacks that the Broncos had in this entire 8-year drought, but he still wasn't good enough. This team was not good enough, and they couldn't make the playoffs. And I do feel that the biggest problem with this team is the fact that the defense was no longer an all-time unit. Last year, it is called the no-fly zone. It is one of the best defenses in the history of the NFL. I know I've said that already, but I really want to hit that point home. This season, you just aren't that. You're great, but DeMarcus Ware misses time because he is older, and I'm pretty sure he had some back problems and missed a lot of this season. And your defense just wasn't an all-time unit anymore, so it needed more from your offense. It needed more from Trevor Siemian as a quarterback, and he just couldn't do that, and Denver couldn't make the playoffs. Unfortunately, after this season is when Gary Kubiak retired. Now, going into 2017 and 2018, once again, we still have confidence that this defense is pretty good, plus our new head coach, Vance Joseph, is a defensive-minded guy. So this defense should still probably be a very solid unit, and we just need more from the offense. So we have Brock Osweiler back on the team and Trevor Siemian. So if Trevor Siemian plays poorly, we can put Brock Osweiler in, who went 5-2 with this group a couple years ago in our Super Bowl season. So either way, we hopefully have a quarterback who can game manage enough to make this team a possible playoff team. We were only 9-7 last year. We just need to be slightly better, and we might squeak into a wild card spot. The unfortunate thing is that Vance Joseph was a god-awful head coach. He was not good at the head coaching duties themselves, and he was also not good at defensive coordinating. He was terrible at defensive coordinating. This defense still had some of the most talent in the league. They still had most of the players that they had from their Super Bowl. They still had Von Miller. They had Shaq Barrett, who would leave, I think, a year or two later than this and get 19 sacks. We still had Bradley Roby, Chris Harris. We still had so many solid talent players on this team this year. They finished 22nd in points during that season, and they just weren't a very solid unit. They were third in yards, which wasn't bad, but overall this defense was probably one of the worst units that Denver has had in that entire era, which obviously wasn't going to be a recipe for success. Denver was not good enough offensively to pick up the slack in that way. And another way that they gave you hope this season is they started 2-0. They beat the Chargers in week 1, and then they absolutely blew out the Cowboys 42-17 in week 2. So you had some sort of confidence that, hey, this team might actually be able to do it. But that would just not be the case. They won one game of their next 10 and were 3-9 going into week 13, and the rest of the season doesn't even matter. They ended up finishing this season 5-11. Now into 2018-2019, Denver had just drafted Bradley Chubb with the 5th overall pick, which seemed to be really good. You still have Von Miller, and Bradley Chubb is one of the best pass rushing prospects in a long time. This felt like a pretty solid move. I mean, it felt like the defense was going to be pretty good, even though there were quarterbacks on the board at the time. We wouldn't know about Josh Allen. We wouldn't know about this. Bradley Chubb, Von Miller on that defensive line, Bradley Chubb being one of the best pass rushing prospects in that draft, and then obviously Von Miller is one of the best pass rushers of all time. It felt like a great move to bolster this defensive line because they needed some extra pass rush that they lost with DeMarcus Ware last year, which was going to help this Vance Joseph defense just a little bit, hopefully. And for the most part, the offensive infrastructure still looks relatively the same. You still have DT, you still have Emmanuel Sanders, and now this year you have Case Keenum, who just took the Vikings to the NFC Championship the year before, which some people thought was a fluke, and it ended up really being a fluke. But at the end of the day, Broncos fans were just looking for somebody to come in there and manage the game, and Case Keenum might have been able to do that. Clearly not. But once again, the offense was just piss poor. The offense finished 24th in points and 19th in yards. Demaryius Thomas was traded in the middle of the season. He was a franchise cornerstone, one of my favorite players growing up. Absolutely loved DT, but he was just not very good anymore. He had a lot of drop problems and got traded to the Texans in the middle of the season. The only really good redeeming quality about this season is an undrafted rookie, Philip Lindsay, had 1,000 yards and was able to go to the Pro Bowl. And this is huge for Denver because if you are able to establish a run game, you just need to find now the quarterback. You have wide receivers that were good. At this point, Denver had Cortland Sutton and they still had Emmanuel Sanders, and I think they had Noah Fant at this point. So you have a lot of young pieces, and now you're adding Philip Lindsay to that. With a quarterback, this offense can really be solid, and that you already have some good defensive talent, so there's a lot of hope for next season. And there's a lot of hope, especially about this pass rushing core. Von Miller, 10 plus sacks. Bradley Chubb, I think he broke the rookie record. It was either the rookie record or the rookie franchise record, but he had 12 sacks in his rookie year, which he just looked like a monster, and it felt like Vaughn and Bradley Chubb together were just going to be amazing going into next season. And the defense wasn't overall amazing this season. It was a Vance Joseph defense that was just lackluster in my opinion, but they still managed this season to be 13th in points, even though they were 28th in yards. Vance Joseph was just not a good head coach and defensive coordinator. He needed to focus on one thing. Clearly, I mean, he's a better defensive coordinator now, but he just couldn't handle those duties whatsoever, and he gets fired after this season, and we hire Vic Fangio for the next season. Now, going into the 2019 season, this is one of the first years in like 6 or 7 years where the Broncos truly didn't have a lot of hope going into the season. After the losing seasons that we had back-to-back and just piss poor quarterback play, it just didn't feel like this team was going to be very good. But you still had some hope because you had talent on the offensive side of the ball and you had talent on the defensive side of the ball. Courtland Sutton was breaking out into a really good receiver. You still had Emmanuel Sanders. You drafted Drew Lock with a second overall pick. You had Phillip Lindsay, who just had 1,000 yards last year. You still had Noah Fant. So it really looks like this offense has a chance. You know, maybe Drew Lock comes into here and he really does well, but he's not going to be starting. We also signed Joe Flacco in the offseason to hopefully, train Drew Lock and maybe Drew Lock can be good later in the season. And now Denver has a new head coach, Vic Fangio, with Bradley Chubb and Von Miller. And honestly, the rest of the defense looked fine, but Bradley Chubb and Von Miller being next to each other after their rookie year just felt like this defense was going to be okay no matter what happened, because we have we have the best pass rushing duo in the league, is what it felt like. With a new QB, a new coach, and a lot of new young weapons on this team, it felt like a new regime. Although there was not a ton of hope for this team going into the beginning of this season, there was still hope, which was immediately short-lived. With Joe Flacco at quarterback, Denver started 0-4 this season, with their first win coming against Tennessee, where they won 16-0, which is kind of ironic. It's kind of funny, but whatever. The Broncos O-line was terrible. Joe Flacco was terrible. They just needed somebody who had a little bit of mobility, and Joe Flacco behind that offensive line, it just was not fun to watch. Emmanuel Sanders was traded mid-season because of the fact that the offense was just not good enough, and they knew this team wasn't going to be good enough. But the biggest problem with this team is that they were able to stop teams, but they could not force sacks and turnovers. And Bradley Chubb and Von Miller started the first 2 games of the season without a sack. Neither of them got a sack in the first 2 games. The whole team by itself didn't get a sack for the first 2 games of the season, and they were not forcing turnovers either. This pass rushing duo that just finished the last season with 20 plus combined sacks couldn't get 1 sack in the first 2 games. Bradley Chubb, after 4 games, didn't play the rest of the season because of a torn ACL, and after those 4 games, Chubb still only had 1 sack. He had 1 sack in 4 games and then didn't play the rest of the season. With 5 games left, the Broncos probably had the worst possible season that they could have had. I mean, it was just some terrible, terrible football. With 5 games left, Denver is sitting at 3-8, and it is time to now put Drew Lock in. Joe Flacco is no longer the guy. It is time to give our young dude a shot. Drew Lock would lead the Broncos to a 4-1 stretch in those last 5 games, with a huge win over the 8-4 Texans, where they won 38-20 or something like that. Drew Lock had 300 yards. He was dealing the entire game, and this game and the rest of this 5-game stretch, but mostly this game, gave Broncos fans the most hope in the world that Drew Lock would be the franchise quarterback. Obviously 4-1 in a stretch where you were just 3-8 the rest of the season, and your quarterback is playing some of the best quarterback football that we have seen in the last 4 years. Phillip Lindsay is obviously running all over teams. Courtland Sutton and Noah Fant are having good games. The future looks really bright for them at the end of this season. Now we get to 2020 and 2021, where the hope in Denver is sky high, one of the highest it's been in the past few years. We have a possible franchise quarterback who has played amazing in the 5 games that he's played in so far. Courtland Sutton is a 1,000-yard receiver. Phillip Lindsay is a 2-time 1,000-yard receiver now, or is a 2-time 1,000-yard rusher now. The Broncos also signed Melvin Gordon, who had a lot of talent and looked fantastic over with the Chargers. So the backfield of Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay just looks absolutely lethal. It looks like one of the best running back duos in the entire NFL at the point. The Broncos drafted Jerry Jeudy with the 12th overall pick from Alabama, and he looked like the best route runner and separator in the draft. Had so much talent. He was also really fast. He felt like a can't-miss prospect at the wide receiver position. You obviously still have Noah Fant, who is just an amazing playmaker with the ball in his hands. He's super fast and he's decent when he catches the football. His problem was always his blocking and his dedication to the team, but at the end of the day, he was the most talented tight end we'd had since Julius Thomas, and that still stands today. Now, the defense looks a little rockier because Von Miller is going to miss this entire season with an ankle injury, so we don't have one of our best pass rushers, but hopefully Bradley Chubb will able to get some pressure on the quarterbacks. We have Justin Simmons, who I believe was an all-pro, Kareem Jackson on the team. They had players on this squad. They also had just signed AJ Bouye, who made a Pro Bowl in the season before. This defense still looks like a solid unit even without Von Miller, and with the fact that the offense looks like it might actually finally be good, it'll be okay if the defense takes a slight step back and the offense steps up. Denver looks young and hungry with a possible shot at a playoff spot. But the season starts off about as bad as it could. In week 2, Drew Lock gets an injury and has to miss a few games. Cortland Sutton tears his ACL in the first game of the season, and we don't see him again for the rest of the year, of course, because it's a torn ACL. And Denver starts off the season 0-3. And the Broncos offense was just not very good this year because Drew Lock was turning the ball over. He actually led the league in interceptions this season, and the few games that he missed, you had Jeff Driscoll and Brett Rippon start games, which they're just not good quarterbacks whatsoever. So this offense still just isn't very good. They also aren't going to have Cortland Sutton. Phillip Lindsay took a step back. Melvin Gordon fumbles the ball a lot. Like I said before, Drew Lock turns the ball over way too much at the highest clip in the league. And because of all this coming together, this defense was already probably the worst unit it had been since 2016. And now they're being put in bad position after bad position. They finished 21st in yards this year and 25th in points. It was just not the best defensive unit for a lot of reasons. Like I said, being put in bad positions. This offense was bad. It went about as bad as it possibly could have gone, especially with how much hope you had going into the season. This felt like a season where Denver would finally be able to threaten a playoff spot, but they went 5-11, and it was just a terrible season. Phillip Lindsay would also play his last season in Denver, just his 3rd season here after 2,000-yard seasons, and this would unfortunately be his last. This was also the COVID year, so it was a really weird year. One game this season, Kendall Hinton had to start a game for us against the Saints because Drew Lock, I believe Drew Lock had COVID. Jeff Driscoll was injured, and another 2 quarterbacks had COVID and one of them was injured. So we had to throw in an emergency quarterback. Phillip Lindsay played Wildcat a lot of that game, but it was also just a lot of Kendall Hinton playing quarterback and just not doing well. He completed one pass to Noah Fant, and I think it was a screen that went for like 10 yards. But besides that, it was just it was actually the worst game I've ever watched in my entire life. It was terrible. Now, because of that catastrophic season, going into the 2021-22 season, Denver just didn't have a lot of hope going into the next year. They had just traded a 6th round draft pick to bring Teddy Bridgewater over here as another game managing guy. But I mean, you didn't really have a lot of confidence in Teddy Bridgewater as the quarterback. The backup was going to have to be Drew Lock, so you didn't have much confidence in him either because he turns the ball over too much. And instead of drafting a quarterback in the 1st round, they draft Pat Surtain, which would prove to be a very good idea for this defense, especially. You're getting Von Miller back, and hopefully Bradley Chubb will be back and healthy and they can play together and finally look good. In the 2nd round, you were able to draft Javonte Williams, who looked like one of the best running back prospects in the class. In fact, some people had him as the best running back. Sutton is coming back from his injury. You have Tim Patrick and Jerry Jeudy hopefully getting more years under their belt and looking better. There is some hope for this team, just not a ton. But of course, Denver doing what they do best in getting your hopes up. They start the season 3-0, although it was against some pretty bad teams. It was against the Giants, the Jets, and the Jaguars, who were all very bad teams at that time. But they blew him out. They played very well against him. So it felt like, they have a chance this year, even though they're beating up on bad teams to start the year. And you don't have the most confidence that the 3-0 start is 100% legitimate, it still gave you some hope. And Teddy Bridgewater was giving us some of the best quarterback play we had seen in a few years, so there was a chance that this team was actually going to be able to make the playoffs. But in the fourth game, Teddy Bridgewater goes down, Drew Lock has to come in, and then after that, they lose their next 4 games in a row. Teddy Bridgewater did come back, but he didn't look amazing. In that game that he did get hurt, Drew Lock played, and of course he didn't look good. But now Denver is 3-4 after starting 3-0. But Denver was not done giving the Broncos hope yet, because in their next 6 games, Denver went 4-2 to get them back to 7-6, which puts them in prime position in the hunt. But once again, Teddy Bridgewater gets hurt. This time it's a season-ending concussion in which I think he tried to hurdle somebody and fell on his head, and he just couldn't play the rest of the year, so Drew Lock had to come in, and Denver would lose their last 4 games and finish 7-10 that season. So much hope going straight down the drain immediately. And during this season, Von Miller would get traded to the Rams, franchise cornerstone. Again, probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite Bronco of all time. I absolutely love Von Miller. So it was really tough to see him get traded to the Rams, but he would go on and win a Super Bowl that season, so good for Von. Now to the 2022 and the 2023 season, the season of hope. I've never had as much hope and excitement going into a season as I did the 2022 season. And you may be asking, why is that? Denver had just traded for Russell Wilson, who before coming to Denver seemed to be a top 10 or a top 7 quarterback. He had been fantastic his entire career before this, even winning a Super Bowl. And to this point, Denver for 6 seasons had been looking for somebody to come in and be their franchise quarterback, and nobody was standing up to that task. So finally, George Payton made a huge move. Instead of these tiny little, let's sign a game managing quarterback, let's try and draft one. No, this time we're making a big move for an established guy like Russell Wilson, who has been fantastic throughout his career. We trade Drew Lock, Noah Fant, and Shelby Harris in 2 first-round picks over to the Seahawks to get Russell Wilson. It is a decent price, but it is a price that we're willing to pay. And then Denver almost immediately pays Russell Wilson a massive contract to keep him there long term for the next few years because, it's Russell Wilson. We want a guy to be solidified here for the next few years, especially a guy who has been established previously in his career. The vibes are now extremely high in Denver with Russell Wilson. You have Cortland Sutton. You have Javonte Williams, who last year led the league in broken tackles as a rookie with 100 less carries than second place. Jerry Jeudy, who is hopefully going to get a year better and who would hopefully play a lot better with Russell Wilson. The defense was 3rd in points last year and 8th in yards. They just hired an offensive-minded head coach who had worked with Aaron Rodgers before, Nathaniel Hackett. He seemed like a good personality and a good coach for the system. Somebody who could possibly work really well next to Nathaniel Hackett and create a very, very good offense for the Broncos. This was finally a season where Denver was projected to threaten the Chiefs and possibly win this division. And we all know that didn't happen. This was probably the most excruciating year of football that anybody will ever watch of their favorite team. I understand there have been bad seasons from teams, and Denver didn't even finish as the worst team in the league. It's not like they went 0-16 or something. But I don't think anybody will ever have a worse time watching a team play football than trying to... I'd rather scratch my eyes out with rusty nails than to watch the 2022-2023 Broncos again. This was the worst season in the history of football, in my opinion. And what sucked was the defense wasn't even that bad again. They kept these games close. In the 12 losses that Denver had this season, 9 of them were 1-score games. The defense was great this season. The offense was possibly the worst unit that I've ever seen in my life. They finished dead last in points per game at 16.9. They had a streak of like 15 to 13 games between this season and the season prior of not even being able to score 20 points. That is absolutely ridiculous, even with Russell Wilson at the helm. And it's not like Russell Wilson got hurt. He played this entire season and he just looked horrible. And the main reason for all of this was Nathaniel Hackett. He was the worst head coach. He was probably one of the worst head coaches in NFL history, not even lasting past his first season. He didn't even finish his first season. He was so unbelievably horrible. He couldn't get the offense right. He couldn't manage the game as a head coach whatsoever. And it was apparent from week one when you paid your quarterback all this money. It's 4th and 5. It's 17 to 16 with like 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter, and you really have a chance to go win. Your quarterback had 340 yards in week one of this game, and he's previously known to be a top 7, top 10 quarterback. So why not put the ball in the hands of him to try and get this first down, because you're around midfield. You're in that like no man's land where it's not really smart to kick a field goal, so you really need to go for it in this scenario. But he elects to kick the field goal. Brandon McManus misses inevitably because it's like a 65 or a 66 yard field goal, and he misses it, and Denver loses that game. And from that point on, Denver fans kind of knew that Nathaniel Hackett was just awful. And maybe it would have made this season a little bit better if we had Javonte Williams at the helm, but Javonte Williams tears his knee up in the second game of the season. So we have Melvin Gordon, who is just a fumble guy. He just fumbles and fumbles and fumbles and fumbles and fumbles. The amount of times we lost games because Melvin Gordon couldn't stop fumbling the football. And once again, the defense wasn't bad. It wasn't like this offense even had to be that good. They just had to be okay. They were the worst defense in the NFL, or they were the worst offense in the NFL. All they had to do was be okay, and they would have won 8 games maybe. But they were like the worst offense in the history of the, like, I don't know if I've ever seen an offensive group so genuinely horrible. It was just terrible. And now a team that possibly felt like they could get around 10 wins this season finishes 5-12, and they don't have their first round pick. So once again, the hope is just shattered. After 2022, the hope has never been higher. Now in 2023, 2024, the last year of Denver's playoff drought, because Russell Wilson was a very good quarterback before he came to Seattle, it felt as though Nathaniel Hackett was the biggest reason as to why Russell Wilson wasn't very good. Most of last year was pampering Russell Wilson. That's what it was. He had his own office. He made all the decisions. He made all the offensive decisions, and Nathaniel Hackett was just letting it happen. George Payton was too, but it was a lot on Nathaniel Hackett. So what Denver decided to do was trade for a future Hall of Fame offensive mind, Sean Payton, to try and fix this offense and try and fix Russ, honestly. And it felt like Russ was going to be better this season because he was going to have a better offensive mind with him, and he was going to have somebody who was going to discipline him. You know, he was going to have somebody who was going to be more of a strong arm in this offense, or more of a strong arm in this team, and you needed that with Sean Payton. So this did feel like a year where the Denver offense was going to look better, and Russell Wilson was probably going to look better with a much better offensive mind. And, you know, Sean Payton is a future Hall of Fame head coach, so Broncos fans were right to be a little bit optimistic and hopeful for the upcoming season. But based on how unbelievably catastrophically horrible last season went, like one of the worst seasons that Broncos fans have ever had to watch in their entire fandom. There was still a lot of skepticism about whether this team was going to be good. There was still a lot of us wondering, not trying to put too much hope on this team because of the fact that it went so horribly last year. But you couldn't help but have some hope. This year, Denver also brought back Vance Joseph as the defensive coordinator, which most Broncos fans weren't very happy with, including me, because he wasn't a very good defensive coordinator the first time that he was here. But overall, the defense still has a decent amount of talent, and it still looks like a group that we can be happy to have. And obviously, we still have Judy, we still have Sutton, we still have Javonte, we still have these guys who should be decent this season. And as we expected, the offense did look better. It started to look better throughout the beginning of the season, but it really didn't matter. Denver still started 0-3 with a 70-20 loss to the Dolphins, in which that was just one of the craziest games I've ever seen. I remember going to halftime of that game. It was 35-14, and I was making my pizza, and I was like, yes, we're down 21 points, but this game isn't out of the realm of coming back. A team that scores 35 in the first quarter is probably only going to finish with like 42 max. You just don't score that many points. It's not like they're going to score 35 in the second half also, right? Yeah, well, I'm stupid. So a lot of people wanted Vance Joseph fired after that game, which only gave him 3 games of his next tenure with Denver. But Denver stuck with him, which I do think was a great idea. The rest of the season, Denver led the league in turnovers, and they were also top 15 in points in the last 14 games and top 15 in yards in the last 14 games. So the defense was solid to finish the season. It was just the beginning. It was really rough. Denver would start the season 1-5, and it just felt like a throwaway season. It felt like we sucked, and it was going to be the season that we all kind of expected it to be. We hoped it wouldn't be, but we kind of expected it to be. But after starting 1-5, Denver would go on a 5-game winning streak in which they would beat the Packers, the Chiefs, which ended an 8-year drought against the Chiefs, the Bills, the Vikings, and the Browns. 4 of those teams were playoff teams, the Browns, Packers, Chiefs, and Bills. The other one was the Vikings, who going into that game were on a 6-game winning streak. Still to this day, this is one of the most fun times I've ever had watching football. All of these games in this stretch were close games, and they all seemed to go similar. It was a close game throughout where Denver was making sure to keep it close and score offensive points just enough to keep them in the game. And then when they absolutely needed a drive, Russell Wilson led them down the field, and Courtland Sutton would catch something over somebody. It seemed like every single game for like an 8-game stretch, Courtland Sutton was having a catch of the year candidate. The toe tap against the Bills, the one-handed grab in the back of the end zone against the Chiefs, the one-handed grab against the Chargers, game-winning head tap catch against the Vikings, another one against the Chiefs where he just caught the ball over L'Jarius Sneed, like caught it on his helmet and snatched it away from him. He was having amazing catches every single game. It was just such a fun stretch to watch. And Denver would now be 6-5 with a chance at the playoffs. And all of this was thanks to Sean Payton. But unfortunately, the next game against the Texans after this win streak, Russell Wilson would throw 3 interceptions, including the game-losing interception in the end zone, and they would lose 22-17 to the Texans. And that would just be the start. The next game, they would lose 42-17 to the Lions. They would lose 4 of their last 6 games and miss the playoffs once again at 8-9. And another one of those losses against the Patriots, Russell Wilson absolutely fumbles the game away. There's one play from that game that is very memorable that got Russ benched, in which he's in the cleanest pocket I've ever seen, and he runs around and gets all scared and then gets sacked, even though he was in a super clean pocket. The last 2 games of the year, Jarrett Stidham would start for the Broncos, and Denver would finish 8-9 in the 2023 season. One last time, giving us hope, giving us a 5-game winning streak, and, making us be on a super high, super happy because we are finally putting ourselves in a position to possibly go to the playoffs this season and completely let ourselves down the rest of the year. That would be the end of the Russ era, and he would get released, causing the biggest cap hit in NFL history. And then Denver would go on to draft Bo Nix with the 12th overall pick and make the playoffs for their first time since 2016 the very next season. Year after year, Denver kept giving Broncos fans so much hope, so much belief that they could possibly go to the playoffs, that they could possibly be a contending team, that they could possibly win good games. And it was always, every single year, the close games that really hurt us. Like I said, over half of our losses in that 8-year drought were one-score losses. Every single year it felt like Denver was a couple plays away from being in the playoffs. It wasn't us getting blown out. It wasn't us losing 15 games, 14 games every year and getting a top draft pick. It was always losing close games time after time after time after time. Always the close games, man. Oh, man. And I've said this to my friends. I've said this to my family. I just said this before. I would have much rather us just completely suck year after year after year. I would rather us just completely be terrible than to be close as much as we were close. And now the Broncos are 14-3. Coming off of an AFC Championship appearance, and now they have Jalen Waddle, and I am super happy about it. But I wanted to bring back up the excruciating time period of my life. You know, I wanted people to understand the pain that Denver Broncos fans went through for 8 years and why we have so much happiness for a player like Bo Nix. A lot of people seem to not understand why we love Bo Nix so much, why we glaze Bo Nix so much, and why we are ride or die for him the way that we are, is because of this drought that we went on, just because we couldn't get the right quarterback leading this team. We couldn't find the guy. We even went and got a guy who was one of the better quarterbacks in the league, and he still couldn't do anything for this team. So finally, we found our guy. We're excited. And I'm so glad we're not in this drought anymore. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you guys in the next video.